Why did the air feel wrong that morning? Sergeant Ava Cole couldn't explain it, only that silence carried differently in the desert that day. Even the wind sounded suspicious, dragging grains of dust across the convoy line like whispers of something waiting. She sat behind the wheel of the second Humvee, one hand resting on the gear, the other on the stock of her rifle, scanning the horizon through heat shimmer. "Cole," her captain's voice crackled through the radio. "Eyes up. We're sweeping 5 clicks past the ridge, then looping back. Should be quiet." Quiet, it always started quiet. Ava glanced at the captain's vehicle ahead, the lead truck cutting through sunlight and haze, and for a moment she caught her own reflection in the side mirror. Dust on her face, sweat trickling behind her ear, the faint tremor in her jaw she didn't want anyone to see. She'd been deployed for months, but this was her first patrol as acting convoy sergeant, and the weight of it sat heavy behind her ribs. She wasn't supposed to be here, not in this exact role. 2 weeks earlier, the original sergeant had been flown out with shrapnel wounds. Command rotated Ava forward. "You've got the instincts," they told her. "You don't hesitate." But she did hesitate sometimes, when no one was looking, when the noise stopped and the doubts came creeping in. The captain's voice came again, cutting through static. "Everything all right back there?" "Yes, sir," she replied, eyes narrowing at the ridge line. "Just sand." He chuckled softly through the comms. "It's always just sand until it's not." She smiled at that. Captain Reed, 38, steady, unshakable, the kind of leader who made you believe in something even when you couldn't name it. He had a habit of tapping his wedding ring against his rifle whenever he was deep in thought. Little things like that made him human, and maybe that's why his men followed him so completely. Ava respected him. More than that, she trusted him, and out here trust was currency. The convoy pushed forward. Sunlight bled across the desert floor, glaring off shattered glass from some long-buried wreck. The air shimmered, carrying the faint tang of oil and heat. Ava's gunner, Lopez, squinted through binoculars. "Nothing moving," he muttered. "Feels too still, though." "Stay sharp," Ava said, leaning forward. "I don't like still." The words barely left her mouth when the world detonated. The explosion came before the scream. One heartbeat of silence, then fire. The lead vehicle vanished in a roar of light and metal. The shockwave hit Ava's truck like a fist, flipping her forward against the dash. Her helmet cracked against steel, vision bursting white. Ears rang, breath gone. Then chaos. Smoke, sand, gunfire. "Contact, contact, North Ridge." Her radio screamed alive with overlapping voices. Ava blinked through the haze, trying to focus. She could taste blood, copper, and grit. Her hands trembled as she reached for her rifle, but it was gone, thrown somewhere into the dirt. Lopez was shouting, trying to get the turret operational, but his words blurred into noise. She crawled out of the cab, the world spinning, the smell of fuel thick enough to choke on. The captain's vehicle, the one that exploded, was gone. All that remained was a column of smoke and pieces of burning metal scattered like confetti from hell. "Reed," she shouted, but her voice cracked in the static. Gunfire cracked again, a sharp, distant echo from the ridge. Enemy snipers, precise, deliberate. Ava ducked behind the wreckage, heart pounding so hard it hurt. Every instinct screamed to stay down, to wait for backup. But something else pushed through the panic, that voice she drilled into her head 1,000 times during training. "Move with purpose. Don't freeze." Through the smoke she heard it, faint, broken, a voice calling for help. "Help someone." Her chest tightened. It was Reed. The sound came from the far side of the blast crater. She didn't think, didn't weigh options. She just moved, crawling low through sand and debris, the ground still hot from the explosion. Every few feet, another bullet snapped overhead. She flinched, grit grinding between her teeth. Her palms were raw, blood mixing with dust. The air shimmered like molten glass. Somewhere behind her, Lopez shouted her name, but she didn't turn. The captain's voice grew weaker. "Don't leave." "I'm here," she gasped. "Hold on." When she finally reached him, the sight hollowed her out. Reed was pinned beneath a collapsed barricade, a steel beam crushing his leg at an angle no human limb should bend. Blood soaked into the sand beneath him, dark and spreading fast. His face was pale, sweat streaking down his temples. "Stay awake," she said, breath ragged. "You hear me? Stay awake." He tried to push her away. "Cole, you can't go." "Not happening." Her hand slipped on the beam, slick with oil and dust. She dug her boots in, braced her shoulders, and pulled. Nothing. It didn't even budge. The weight of it might as well have been the sky. She tried again, gritting her teeth. Her muscles screamed. Pain flared through her ribs where she'd hit the dash. But she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. "Come on," she whispered through clenched teeth. "Come on, damn it." Reed's breathing grew shallower. The ground beneath them felt like it was swallowing the light. Ava scanned the wreck, spotted a cable from the rear axle of a half-buried vehicle. She yanked it free, looping it around the beam, hands trembling. Her vision blurred from heat and dust, but she kept moving, threading the line, making leverage the way her instructor once showed her back in Quantico. She remembered his words like an echo. "It's never about strength. It's about will." She pulled again, once, twice. On the third pull, the beam shifted, not much, but enough. She dropped to her knees, shoved a piece of debris under for support, then pulled again until her arms went numb. The beam rolled just slightly, enough to drag Reed free. He screamed as she pulled him clear. "Stay with me," she shouted, crawling backward, dragging him by the vest. "You're good, you're fine." "Cole," his voice was barely a whisper now, "you should have gone." "I don't leave people," she said, biting down hard, tasting blood. Gunfire spat from the ridge again. Bullets chewed the dirt inches away. Ava threw herself over him, shielding his body with her own, every nerve on fire. The ridge was 20 meters ahead, a small slope leading toward the faint outline of base walls beyond. 20 meters. It might as well have been 20 miles. She swallowed hard. "Hold on, Captain." She started dragging him. One arm hooked under his shoulders, the other clawing at the ground. Her body screamed in protest. Her breath came in broken gasps. The world blurred into sound, her heartbeat, the grind of metal, the hiss of wind through the smoke. She moved like a ghost through the wreckage, half crawling, half collapsing but never stopping. Every meter was a war. The smell of burning fuel filled her lungs. The heat clawed at her skin. She felt her strength leaving her in pieces, but she kept going, dragging Reed inch by inch toward that faint shimmer of safety. Then a final gunshot. A flash of pain tore through her shoulder. She staggered, fell forward. Her vision tunneled into white. She didn't remember hitting the ground. When she woke, there was no smoke, no screaming, just light, soft and filtered through fabric, the hum of machines, the faint beeping of a monitor. She tried to sit up, but a hand gently pressed her down. "You're safe," a voice said. A medic, calm, tired. "You got him out." Her throat was dry. "Reed." "Alive," he said, "thanks to you." Ava blinked, the ceiling of the field hospital swimming in and out of focus. Her chest ached. Her shoulder was bandaged. Every breath hurt, but she was alive. Somehow she was alive. The medic hesitated before speaking again. "You might want to see this." He pulled the flap of the tent aside and sunlight flooded in. Outside, a field stretched wide and bright, shimmering with heat. Rows of Marines stood at attention, hundreds of them, lined across the open ground. Ava frowned. "What's going on?" The medic smiled faintly. "They heard what you did." Her heart stumbled. At the far end of the line, Captain Reed stood pale, on crutches, but upright. The moment she stepped out of the tent, he raised his hand and saluted. Then, as one, 800 Marines followed. The sound vanished. The desert went still again, but this time it wasn't silence from fear. It was silence made of respect. Ava froze. She didn't know what to do with the weight of it, all those eyes, all that honor turned toward her. Her throat tightened. She wanted to speak, to say something, but nothing came out. She didn't need to. For the first time since the blast, she let herself breathe. Later, the official report would compress everything she'd done into 3 sterile lines. Assisted in recovery of commanding officer. Sustained severe injuries. Mission integrity maintained. But the men who were there would tell it differently. They would remember the dust, the blood, the way she refused to let go when every reason said to. And long after the paperwork was filed and the ribbons pinned, her name would echo quietly through the barracks, not shouted, not glorified, just remembered. Because some acts don't need ceremony, they just need witness. And sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. Why did applause feel heavier than silence? Weeks later, Ava still remembered the sound, or rather, the absence of it. 800 Marines standing at attention, the desert wind tugging at their flags, and her heart somewhere between disbelief and guilt. She'd never liked attention, not for what she'd done, not when she knew how easily things could have gone the other way. Now, lying in a recovery ward that smelled faintly of antiseptic and dust, she stared at the ceiling and tried to breathe through the ache. Her shoulder was immobilized. Her ribs were bound tight. Each inhale felt like it scraped against sandpaper. The medic said she'd be fine given time, but time was exactly what she didn't want. Time meant thinking, remembering. Every night the blast replayed in her head, the heat, the ringing, the captain's voice fatting beneath the roar. She'd wake up sweating, hands clenched in the sheets, half expecting to find herself back in that crater. Sometimes she could still taste the blood in her mouth, that metallic grit that came from breathing too close to fire. "Nightmares?" a voice asked softly. She turned her head. Captain Reed stood at the entrance, his crutches pressed under his arms, uniform sharp even over the bandages visible at his collar. She swallowed hard. "Sir." He nodded toward the empty chair beside her bed. "Permission to sit." "Always." He eased himself down, the metal of the crutches clinking against the floor. For a moment neither spoke. The machines beeped quietly between them. Then he said, "They told me you haven't been sleeping." "I'm fine." "That's not what they said." She looked away. "With respect, sir, it's hard to sleep when you keep seeing the same thing over and over." He nodded slowly. "The blast. The noise, the light, the everything." She clenched her jaw, blinking hard. "It's stupid. I should be grateful to even be here." Reed leaned forward slightly. "You think gratitude cancels memory." She met his eyes. They were steady, the same calm blue she remembered from the convoy briefings. There was strength there, but something softer too. "I just don't want it to make me weak," she whispered. "It doesn't." He paused, voice low. "You know what makes people weak, pretending they're not hurt." The words hit deeper than she expected. She tried to answer, but all that came out was air. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, folded patch, the scorched insignia from his torn vest. "They found this near the wreck. Figured it belonged to you more than me." She stared at it, the fabric stiff with sand and smoke. "Sir, I don't." He held up a hand. "You carried me through hell, Cole. You earned it." Her throat tightened. She took the patch carefully, fingertips brushing the burnt edges. It was nothing more than a symbol, yet it weighed like stone. Reed studied her face for a moment. "You ever wonder why you didn't freeze?" She hesitated. "I didn't have time to think." "Exactly," he said quietly. "That's the difference between instinct and fear. You didn't think, you acted, and sometimes that's what saves people." He pushed himself upright with the crutches, grimacing slightly. "We're both still here because of it." As he started toward the door, she found herself asking, "Sir, why did you salute me that day?" He looked back, the faintest smile on his face. "Because respect isn't about rank. It's about courage when no one's watching." And then he was gone. The room felt larger without him and lonelier. Ava stared at the patch again, running her thumb over the rough fabric until her eyes blurred. Somewhere beneath the ache and confusion, a strange thought rose. Maybe surviving wasn't the hardest part. Maybe living after was. Days turned into weeks. The medics cleared her for light-duty paperwork, logistics, anything that didn't involve combat. She hated it. The desk felt like a cage. Every morning she'd limp to the operations tent, watching convoys roll out through the perimeter gates, engines rumbling, soldiers laughing, that mix of nerves and camaraderie that came before every mission. She used to be out there with them. Now she was behind a clipboard. Lopez would swing by sometimes. The gunner from her Humvee, loud, loyal, unfiltered. He carried guilt the same way she did, though he masked it with jokes. "Captain says you're cleared for PT next week," he told her one morning, dropping a cup of bitter coffee on her desk. "Bet you'll outrun half the platoon in a day." She smiled faintly. "If I don't break something first." He leaned against the desk, his grin fatting. "You still see it, don't you?" Ava didn't answer. He sighed. "Yeah, me too." That silence between them, the kind that carried more truth than words, hung there until the radio on her desk crackled. A voice came through, tense and clipped. "Medical unit, standby patrol returning with wounded. ETA 5 minutes." Ava's stomach dropped. The voice wasn't one she recognized, but the tone, that sharp edge of chaos barely held together, was all too familiar. Without thinking, she grabbed her jacket. "Cole," Lopez started, but she was already moving. Outside, the base was alive with motion. Medics sprinted toward the landing pad as a Black Hawk descended, blades kicking up waves of dust. The air smelled like fuel and iron. Ava shielded her eyes as the helicopter settled, doors sliding open to reveal stretchers, 3 Marines, one barely conscious, all bleeding. She froze. The sight hit too close to home. "Get those IVs started," a medic shouted. "Move, move." Ava stepped forward to help, instinct overriding reason. She grabbed the nearest stretcher and helped guide it down. Her shoulder burned, but she ignored it. The young soldier on the stretcher, barely 20, blood matting his hair, looked up at her with wide, dazed eyes. "Am I gonna make it?" he whispered. Her chest tightened. She squeezed his hand. "You're going to be fine, you hear me." He nodded weakly, slipping into unconsciousness as they rushed him inside. Afterward, when the dust settled and the adrenaline faded, Ava found herself sitting outside the med bay, staring at her trembling hands. The metallic smell of blood clung to her skin. It never went away, she realized. The smell, the noise, the memories, they followed you like shadows that refused to fade. Reed found her there later, silent and pale. He didn't say anything at first, just stood beside her, watching the last light fade from the sky. Finally, he said, "You know, when I was pinned under that beam, I thought that was it." She glanced at him. "I remember thinking this is how it ends. Then I saw movement through the smoke, you crawling toward me, and I remember thinking, why her?" He smiled faintly. "But I know now." She frowned. "Why?" "Because some people are built to run toward the fire. Doesn't mean they don't get scared. It just means they go anyway." She stared at the horizon, the last rays of sun glinting off the barbed wire fence. "I'm not sure what that makes me." He tilted his head. "Human." The word lingered in the air like something sacred. That night, Ava sat alone in her quarters, the faint hum of the generator outside her window. The patch Reed had given her lay on the table beside a half-empty cup of coffee. She turned it over in her hand, staring at the burnt threads. Part of her wanted to leave it there, let the story end where it began. But another part, the restless part that couldn't sit still while others bled, wouldn't let her. She opened her notebook, the one she'd carried through every deployment, and began to write. Not a report, not for command, just words, fragmented thoughts, the kind that only made sense when whispered. He said courage is running toward the fire. But maybe courage is staying afterward. Maybe it's facing what you brought back. She paused, staring at the last line. Her hands shook slightly. The generator outside stuttered. Somewhere in the distance, a convoy engine rumbled, fatting into the night. For the first time in weeks, she let herself cry. Not the silent tears she'd forced back during briefings or checkups. Real tears, sharp, raw, honest. And when the last one fell, she felt lighter. Not healed, just lighter. Because maybe healing wasn't a finish line. Maybe it was the choice to keep moving, even when every part of you wanted to stop. A week later, Reed found her again, this time at the edge of the training yard, watching the younger recruits run drills. He stood beside her quietly before saying, "We're redeploying soon. Different sector, quieter, they say." She nodded slowly. "You going?" "Command wants me stateside for a bit. Rehab," he looked at her. "They want you on the next rotation. Logistics unit, safe work." She gave a small, humorless laugh. "Safe doesn't exist out here." He smiled. "True, but maybe it's a start." Ava looked at him, really looked. The lines of fatigue around his eyes, the faint limp, the resilience underneath it all. She realized then that survival wasn't just luck. It was responsibility. "Sir," she said softly, "you ever think about that day?" "Every morning." He paused. "But I don't think about the blast anymore. I think about what came after." She nodded. "The silence." "The silence," he echoed. "It's not empty if you listen right. Sometimes it's gratitude." That night before lights out, Ava walked back to the same spot where she'd once stood before 800 Marines. The sand had long since covered the footprints, but she remembered every face, every still salute. She knelt, pressing the patch into the dirt, and whispered, "For all the ones who didn't get to stand back up." The wind shifted, carrying the sound away. And for the first time since the explosion, she didn't feel haunted by silence. She felt part of it. Part of something larger, quiet, invisible, enduring. Because the real weight of courage isn't in the medals or the ceremonies. It's in what you carry after. Why did peace feel more dangerous than war? It had been 40 days since Ava Cole's last mission, 40 days since the explosion that almost ended her career. Now, she stood beneath a pale sunrise at a remote forward operations base in northern Afghanistan, a place so quiet it almost felt like exile. No gunfire, no radio chatter, just the wind scraping across the metal siding of the compound and the soft hum of distant generators. "Welcome to nowhere," the transport pilot had joked when dropping her off. He wasn't wrong. The assignment was simple: oversee supply coordination between outposts, track convoy routes, keep fuel and med shipments consistent. It was the kind of job given to soldiers who'd seen too much, a place to recover. But Ava wasn't sure recovery was what she wanted. Every night she still woke to the same sound, the muffled scream, the flash, the moment of weightless silence before the blast. Some mornings she'd catch herself gripping the edge of her cot, breath shallow, as if the ground might explode again. But here the quiet was worse. The stillness gave the memories too much room to breathe. She spent her days walking the perimeter, checking manifests, keeping her mind busy. The locals called this stretch of desert the Valley of Dust. It was a place where time itself seemed to settle into the sand. Ava met her new commanding officer that first morning, Lieutenant Colonel Marin Hale, mid-40s, sharp eyes, calm tone, the kind of authority that didn't need to shout. Hale studied her file before speaking. "Sergeant Cole, you've seen hell. You're here to make sure we don't run out of water before the next rotation. Think you can handle that?" "Yes, ma'am." "Good, we keep it simple here. We don't chase glory, we keep people alive." It was the first order Ava didn't question. For a while, the rhythm of base life numbed her. Mornings began with convoy checks, afternoons buried in logistics reports, nights staring at the horizon until the desert faded into black. There were fewer soldiers here, maybe 50 total, spread across barracks and watchtowers. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was necessary. One evening, she found herself helping a mechanic named Dixon repair a busted generator. He was young, barely 20, with hands too soft for the desert. "Did you really drag a captain out of a fire?" he asked suddenly, wiping grease from his face. Ava paused. "Who told you that?" "Everyone, story's kind of legendary," he grinned. "You don't look like the type to need rescuing." She smirked faintly. "Looks deceive." He laughed, but she didn't. The silence that followed was heavier than he expected. He cleared his throat and went back to work. That was how it was with most of them. People knew her name before they knew her. They treated her like a ghost from another war. But ghosts didn't sleep. And one night the ghosts came calling again. It started with a radio transmission, faint, broken, nearly lost to static. "Requesting medevac, convoy hit repeat, we are under." Then silence. Ava froze in the communications tent, headset pressed to her ear. The coordinates matched one of their supply runs, a 3-vehicle convoy scheduled to return by dawn. She tried the frequency again. "Convoy Charlie, this is Fob Ridge. Respond." Nothing. She checked her map. The route cut through the canyon south of the base. No cell reception, no satellite visibility. A dead zone. Her stomach turned cold. "Ma'am," she said, turning to Colonel Hale, "we just lost contact with Charlie team. Last ping was South Canyon." Hale looked up from her reports, face unreadable. Sandstorms rolling in, could be interference. Or an ambush. Hale hesitated, then sighed. "We can't risk sending another convoy blind. Wait for recon at first light." Ava stared at her. "That's 6 hours away." "I know. Ma'am, if they're hit, 6 hours means bodies." Hale didn't flinch. "And if we send a rescue now, it could mean more." Ava clenched her jaw. The rational part of her understood. The soldier in her obeyed chain of command. But the person, the one who had once crawled through fire for a man she refused to leave behind, burned with anger. She saluted stiffly and walked out into the night. The wind howled through the base, bringing with it fine streams of sand. The stars above were sharp, cold, distant. She could have gone back to her bunk, could have waited for dawn like she was told. But she didn't. Because sometimes waiting killed people faster than bullets. An hour later, she was halfway down the canyon road in a single Humvee. The sandstorm was closing in fast, sheets of dust blurring the world into brown and gray. The headlights cut through just enough to see the tire tracks of the last convoy. Her pulse hammered, steady but sharp. She shouldn't have been out there. Every part of her training screamed against it. But there was something stronger than protocol, the gnawing knowledge that someone was out there, maybe still alive, maybe calling for help into a dead frequency. Halfway through the canyon, her radio came alive again. "Any unit, this is Charlie 3, hit by IED. We have wounded." Her grip tightened. "Charlie 3, this is Cole. I'm inbound from Ridge. What's your position?" "Half a click east of the ridge line, can't move." The rest cut off in static. She pressed harder on the gas. The Humvee rattled through uneven ground, suspension groaning. The storm howled louder, filling the air with grit. Then she saw it, faint red flares through the dust. Wreckage. 2 trucks were mangled, one overturned, the other smoking. She slammed the brakes, leaped out, covering her mouth against the wind. The air reeked of diesel and blood. "Marines, sound off." A weak voice answered from behind the overturned vehicle. "Here, over here." Ava sprinted toward it, boots slipping in the sand. She found a young corporal, half buried under the wheel well, blood soaking through his sleeve. "Easy," she said, crouching beside him. "You're okay, I got you." His eyes fluttered open, thought no one was coming. "Yeah, well," she grunted, straining to lift the frame just enough to slide him free. "Somebody's gotta ruin your story." He coughed, smiling weakly through the pain. "You're Sergeant Cole, right?" She didn't answer, just pulled him toward the Humvee, heart pounding as the storm thickened. The sound of distant engines echoed through the wind, not friendly. She looked up, squinting through the haze. Headlights faint but growing. 3, maybe 4 vehicles. Enemy trucks. Her blood ran cold. She shoved the wounded corporal into the Humvee and grabbed the rifle from the dash. The storm made visibility useless. She could barely see 10 feet ahead, but she could hear engines, metal, the sound of boots crunching on gravel. Her mind raced. No backup, no comms, one wounded Marine, one half-functional vehicle. And a choice, hide and pray or fight and move. She took a slow breath. Her shoulders still ached from her last injury, but her hands were steady. "Hang in there," she whispered to the corporal. "I'm not leaving you here." The first truck appeared through the dust, a dark silhouette in the swirling chaos. Ava aimed low and fired 3 controlled bursts. The vehicle swerved, clipped a rock, and flipped sideways in a spray of sand. The echo vanished into the storm. She didn't wait to see the rest. She jumped into the driver's seat, slammed the Humvee into gear, and tore down the canyon road, the storm swallowing everything behind her. For 20 minutes, she drove blind, following instinct and fragments of memory, until the outline of the forward base emerged through the dust. When she finally rolled through the gates, her body gave out. The medics rushed in. The corporal was still breathing barely. Hale was there too, her expression unreadable. "What the hell were you thinking?" she demanded later, after the dust settled. Ava stood rigid in her office, uniform streaked with dirt and blood. "I was thinking someone needed help." "You disobeyed a direct order." "Yes, ma'am." "You could have died out there." "Yes, ma'am." "And you saved one of ours," Hale said quietly, setting down her pen. "You know what that means, don't you?" Ava frowned. "Reprimand." Hale smiled faintly. "Recommendation." Ava blinked. "Command's looking for a liaison on the next joint operation. Civilian extraction, border region. You've got field instincts most people don't. Think you can handle that?" Ava hesitated. "I thought I was grounded." "Grounded people don't drive into sandstorms for strangers." Hale's voice softened. "You belong out there, Cole. Just don't make me regret it." That night Ava stood outside her quarters, the wind cold against her face. The storm had passed. The desert was silent again, that endless, breathing kind of silence that seemed to hold both danger and peace. She thought about Reed, about the convoy, about the corporal sleeping somewhere in the med bay because she hadn't waited for permission. Maybe Hale was right. Maybe she did belong out there, not because she craved chaos, but because she understood it. Because she knew that even in the worst moments, a single act, a choice, could tip the scale between life and loss. She looked out toward the horizon. Somewhere beyond it waited another mission, another test of whatever strength she still had left. And somewhere deep inside, that same old fear stirred again, not of dying, but of failing to try. Ava exhaled slowly, eyes on the fading stars. Sometimes peace isn't silence. It's the sound you make when you choose to keep going. Why did every new mission feel like déjà vu? Like walking into the same storm wearing a different uniform? 3 weeks after the sandstorm rescue, Sergeant Ava Cole found herself staring at a new map pinned to the operations board. The terrain was different, tighter valleys, scattered villages, but the feeling was the same. That gnawing weight just below her ribs. The one that whispered, "You've been here before. You know how this ends." Lieutenant Colonel Hale's voice broke the silence. "This isn't a combat op. It's an extraction. We move in, secure the civilians, and move out. Simple." Nothing about extraction was simple. Ava knew that too well. The mission was a joint task with local intelligence, a group of 6 Marines, 3 Afghan interpreters, and 1 civilian medic. Their objective: evacuate a group of teachers trapped in a border village after insurgents seized control of the main road. No air support, no artillery, just stealth, precision, and timing. Ava listened quietly, eyes scanning the satellite images. The village sat in a dry valley with two exit routes, both narrow and exposed. The kind of terrain that turned retreat into roulette. Hale glanced her way. Cole, you'll be acting team lead. Your record speaks for itself. Ava's pulse jumped. Understood, ma'am. Keep it clean, Hale added. No heroics. We need them alive, not headlines. Ava nodded, though the words no heroics stuck like a splinter. She'd heard them before, and every time it was from someone who'd never crawled through the dirt to save a dying man. The convoy rolled out before dawn. 3 vehicles, engines muffled, headlights blacked. The desert sky was a deep indigo, the horizon bleeding toward gray. Ava sat up front, map folded on her knee, rifle resting across her lap. Beside her, Corporal Dixon, the young mechanic she'd worked with weeks earlier, gripped the steering wheel a little too tightly. It was his first time outside the wire. "You nervous?" she asked softly. He gave a short laugh. "Should I lie?" "Not to me." He glanced her way. "You." She smiled faintly. "Always." He nodded like that answer steadied him somehow. Behind them, the medic, Dr. Lin, checked supplies. A quiet man in his late 30s, eyes thoughtful, voice gentle, the kind of person who looked out of place surrounded by rifles and body armor. As the vehicles cut through the low valley, the sun began to rise, painting the mountains in copper light. For a brief moment, the world looked peaceful, as if the war had forgotten this corner of it. But peace never lasted. The radio crackled. "Cole, this is Bravo 2. Local contact says insurgents hit the East Road checkpoint last night. Heavy casualties. If that's true, the village may already be compromised." Ava frowned. "Copy that, adjust route to North Ridge. We'll come in from high ground." The shift bought them time, but also risk. The North Ridge meant rougher terrain and longer exposure. Still, she trusted her gut, and her gut said don't walk straight into their line of fire. By mid-morning, they reached the overlook. The village below looked quiet, too quiet. A handful of mud-brick homes, a dried-out well, smoke curling faintly from somewhere unseen. Dixon muttered, "Where everyone?" "Inside," Ava said, "or gone." She motioned for the team to move. They advanced in pairs, slow and deliberate, weapons low but ready. The air smelled like dust and ash. Halfway down the slope, a voice crackled softly in her headset. "Movement, west side near the well." Ava crouched, peering through her scope. A figure darted between 2 buildings, small, quick. A child, maybe 12. She exhaled, lowering her weapon. "Civilians confirmed, hold fire." They reached the well minutes later. The child was gone, but faint footprints led toward a collapsed house at the far end of the village. Ava gestured silently, 2 men flanking left, she and Lin moving center. As they approached, a faint cry echoed from inside the ruins. "Help, please." Lin froze. "That's English." Ava pushed forward, stepping into the shadowed doorway. The roof had caved in, sunlight filtering through cracks. Beneath a broken beam, a woman lay pinned, blood on her temple, her leg crushed. "Easy," Ava said, crouching beside her. "We're here to get you out." The woman blinked up at her, dazed. "The others, the children, they took them." Ava's stomach dropped. "Where?" She pointed weakly toward the hills. "Old schoolhouse, they're holding them there." Lin moved fast, checking vitals. "She's going into shock." Ava tapped her comms. "Bravo team, evac 1 adult, multiple hostages confirmed north of village. Proceed with caution." "Copy." She turned to Lin. "Can she be moved?" "Not far, internal bleeding." Ava bit her lip, glancing toward the ridge. Every second they stayed risked detection, but leaving the woman wasn't an option. "Dixon," she radioed, "bring the med pack quietly." He arrived moments later, eyes wide as he saw the woman. "Jesus." "Help Lin stabilize her. I'll scout ahead." Wait alone, Lynn said, alarmed. Faster that way. Lynn hesitated, then nodded. Be careful. She gave a half smile. Always am. It wasn't true, and they both knew it. The schoolhouse sat a few hundred meters north, a squat stone building half buried into the hillside. Through her scope, Ava could see faint movement inside. Shadows. She crawled closer, keeping low behind broken walls and scattered rock. Each sound of gravel under her boots felt too loud. Then she heard it, muffled sobbing. Children. Her chest tightened. Two armed men stood at the doorway, rifles slung, laughing quietly. Ava counted them, scanned for others. Two outside, at least three more voices inside. Too many for a solo extraction. But the longer she waited, the greater the risk those kids wouldn't make it out. She weighed options, none good. Then the wind shifted, carrying a sound she recognized instantly. Engines. Convoy, not theirs. She turned, eyes narrowing through the dust. A small pickup truck crawling down from the ridge, more armed men in back. Reinforcements. Time was gone. She pressed her comms. Bravo team, I need backup North Hill, enemy movement inbound. Static. No response. The canyon walls were blocking the signal again. Her heartbeat slowed, the strange calm that always came when choices disappeared. She adjusted her grip on the rifle, eyes on the guards. She could end this now, take the shot, trigger chaos, get the kids out. But it would also risk everyone else still at the village. Orders said extraction, not engagement. But orders didn't hear crying through concrete walls. She whispered to herself, sorry, Hale. Then she moved. The first shot was silent, a suppressed round that dropped one guard before he could finish his laugh. The second man spun, shouting, but she was already moving, rolling behind cover, firing twice more. He fell. Chaos erupted inside, shouts, scrambling feet. Ava sprinted to the doorway, kicking it open. The room was dim, 5 children huddled in a corner, terrified. 2 gunmen remained, one dragging a boy toward the back. Ava fired once, center mass. The man fell. The second turned his weapon toward her, too slow. She slammed him against the wall, disarming him with a brutal twist of her wrist. The rifle clattered to the floor. He lunged. She drove her knee into his chest, then her elbow into his jaw. He collapsed. The silence that followed was deafening. She turned to the children. You're safe, you hear me, you're safe now. A girl, maybe 10, whispered, Are you an angel? Ava almost laughed, almost cried. Not even close. She motioned toward the door. We're leaving, stay behind me, quiet. They moved fast, slipping through the sand and rubble, small hands gripping her uniform. The storm had thinned, sunlight breaking through the clouds. Halfway down the hill, Dixon appeared with 2 Marines and Lynn close behind. His eyes went wide at the sight of the children. Holy, you did it. Ava didn't answer. She was already scanning the ridge. The pickup truck had stopped, silhouettes forming along the crest. Get them to the Humvee, she ordered. Now. Bullets cracked down the slope. The team dove for cover, returning fire. Sand sprayed around them. Ava stayed at the rear, shielding the kids, every movement mechanical, precise, controlled. When the last child climbed into the vehicle, she turned back one last time. The pickup exploded in a burst of flame. Bravo team's RPG. Reinforcements had finally arrived. It was over. Hours later, the children were airlifted to safety. The woman from the ruins survived the trip back to base, thanks to Lynn's quick work. Ava sat on the tailgate of a truck, hands trembling slightly, dust streaking her face. Hale approached, her expression unreadable. Disobeyed another order, she said. Ava nodded, yes, ma'am. Started a firefight against protocol. Yes, ma'am. And saved 5 children and a teacher. Ava hesitated, yes, ma'am. Hale studied her for a long moment, then exhaled. You remind me of someone I used to be. That caught Ava off guard. Don't mistake that for praise, Hale continued, softer now. The ones who run toward the danger, they never come back the same, but maybe that's the point. Ava looked at her hands, bruised, dusty, trembling. I didn't do it for praise. I know, Hale said. That's why it matters. She started to walk away, then stopped. Cole. Ma'am. Next time you break orders, Hale smiled faintly, make sure I can't prove it. Ava almost smiled, almost. As the sun set, she sat alone by the edge of camp, the desert glowing gold and red. The wind carried children's laughter faintly from the med tent, the sound soft, fragile, alive. She closed her eyes, listening. And for a fleeting moment, the noise in her head, the blast, the screams, the echo of gunfire, finally went quiet. Because sometimes silence is an emptiness. It's peace earned the hard way. Why did silence always sound louder in a courtroom? 2 weeks after the extraction, Sergeant Ava Cole stood at attention inside the base's makeshift tribunal room, a narrow prefab unit lit by a single humming bulb. The desert wind rattled against the walls, the sound echoing like a reminder that even judgment had no shelter out here. 3 officers sat behind a folding table, Lieutenant Colonel Marin Hale, a logistics commander flown in from headquarters, and a civilian legal advisor whose uniform looked too clean for this place. On the far end sat Captain Reed. His presence hit harder than she expected. He hadn't told her he'd be here. The proceedings weren't a trial, not exactly. They called it a disciplinary review, a formal phrase for what every soldier understood as someone's going to pay for the paperwork. Hale cleared her throat. Sergeant Cole, you stand before this review for unauthorized deviation from mission parameters, violation of radio silence, and engagement without explicit command approval. Ava kept her eyes fixed forward. Yes, ma'am. You also saved 6 civilians and 5 minors, Hale continued, and prevented a potential hostage execution. Yes, ma'am. The civilian advisor glanced up from his notes. Did you understand the standing order to avoid engagement? Yes, sir. And you chose to ignore it. A beat of silence. I chose to act. The advisor raised an eyebrow. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have. Hale's jaw tightened. Reed shifted slightly but said nothing. The advisor sighed. You understand, Sergeant, if every soldier decided which orders to follow, the chain of command would collapse. Ava met his gaze for the first time. With respect, sir, sometimes the chain breaks because someone at the end holds on too tight. The room froze. Reed's eyes flicked toward Hale. The advisor leaned back, tapping his pen thoughtfully. Dismissed for now, Hale said finally. We'll deliberate. Ava saluted, turned, and walked out. Outside, the air felt too bright. The sun stabbed at her eyes. The weight of discipline and desert heat pressed the same way, heavy, constant, unavoidable. She walked until the tents thinned and the horizon swallowed the noise. Only then did she let herself breathe. Hours passed. She sat on a sand-covered crate near the motor pool, watching mechanics patch bullet holes in the side of a Humvee. Dixon spotted her from across the lot and waved awkwardly. You holding up, he called. Define holding. He grinned, still breathing. Then yeah. He came closer, wiping grease from his hands. Rumor says they're debating whether to pin you or ground you. Ava snorted, figures. Dixon shrugged. Whatever they decide, you did the right thing. She looked at him, searching his young face. Earnest, loyal, still knew enough to believe that right and wrong didn't blur in the field. Sometimes right doesn't matter, she said quietly. Not if the wrong people write the reports. He frowned. Then maybe the reports are wrong. She almost smiled. Maybe. They stood in silence for a moment, the sound of engines and tools clanging behind them. A convoy rumbled past the gates, raising a curtain of dust that drifted slowly across the sky. It looked like smoke. It always looked like smoke. That night, Hale came to find her. Ava was in the comms tent, reviewing supply manifests to keep her hands busy. Hale entered without a word, poured herself a mug of burnt coffee, and leaned against the table. "Board reached a decision," she said. Ava didn't look up. "I figured. You're not being court-martialed." Ava exhaled slowly. "That's something." Hale sipped the coffee. "You're being reassigned stateside." Ava froze. "Reassigned?" "Temporary, debrief and rest cycle. Command thinks you need distance." "Distance from what?" Hale's eyes softened. "From yourself." Ava swallowed the lump rising in her throat. "That's not what I need." Hale set the mug down. "Cole, you've done more good than most soldiers do in a lifetime, but you're burning out. I see it in your eyes. Every day you wake up still fighting the last battle." "I can handle it." "Can you?" Hale asked gently. "You can't win a war if you never come home from the last one." Ava looked away. The comms equipment buzzed quietly between them. Finally she said, "When do I leave?" "Tomorrow." "Copy that, ma'am." Hale turned to go, then stopped. "You saved lives out there. Don't let this feel like punishment." But it did. It felt like exile disguised as mercy. The flight home was silent. No chatter, no music, just the low hum of the C-17 and the rhythmic breathing of the few soldiers sharing the cabin. Reed sat across from her. She hadn't expected that either. He looked different out of uniform. A soft flannel shirt, crutches gone, still walking with a slight limp. He caught her staring. "What?" "Didn't think you'd be on this bird. Didn't think you would be leaving." "Wasn't my choice." "Never is." They sat in that quiet for a while, the vibration of the aircraft filling the gaps between words. Then Reed said, "They're wrong, you know." "About what?" "You." She frowned. "You haven't heard the verdict yet." "I don't need to. I saw you drag a man out of a fire, drive into a storm, and walk into a firefight for children you didn't know. That's not insubordination. That's leadership." She smiled faintly. "You sound like you're writing the speech for my reprimand." "Maybe I am." He paused, studying her face. "You ever wonder why you're still doing this?" "Because someone has to." He nodded slowly. "That's what I used to say, until I realized I was chasing ghosts, all the ones I couldn't save. You don't owe this war your whole life, Cole." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Maybe I already gave it." He didn't argue. There was nothing left to say. When the plane touched down at Andrews, they exchanged a silent nod, the kind that meant more than words. A farewell between two people who'd seen too much of the same fire. Stateside felt foreign. The air was thicker, the noise constant. People smiled too easily. Ava spent the first week in debriefings that sounded more like therapy sessions. "Describe how you felt during the incident," they asked. "What emotions came up when you disobeyed orders?" She gave them the only truth she could. It wasn't emotion, it was instinct. They wrote unprocessed trauma in their notes anyway. By week 3, she was assigned to the training division, evaluating recruits at Camp Pendleton. Rows of fresh faces, crisp uniforms, eyes still bright. Watching them was like looking at a photograph of a life she no longer fit into. During firearms drills, one young woman hesitated before firing, her hands trembling. The instructor barked at her until she froze completely. Ava walked over. "What's your name, Private?" "Grant, ma'am." "Why'd you freeze, Grant?" The girl's eyes welled. I kept thinking, what if I miss?" Ava handed her the rifle again. "Then you correct and fire again. Fear doesn't mean you can't do it. It means you care about doing it right." Grant took a shaky breath, aimed, and squeezed the trigger. Bullseye. The instructor gave a low whistle. Ava just nodded. "See, you don't need to be fearless. You just need to keep moving." Later, as the recruits filed out, the instructor approached her. "You've got away with them. You staying long." She looked out over the empty range, the echo of gunfire fading into memory. "I don't know." That night she sat alone in the barracks courtyard, watching the flag ripple under floodlights. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She hesitated before answering. "Cole." Reed's voice came through, faint but steady. "Thought I'd check if you're still ignoring orders." She smiled despite herself. "Only the boring ones." "Good, because I've got something you might want to hear." He paused and she could hear distant chatter. "Another base, another mission. They're forming a relief unit. Joint task, humanitarian focus. No formal combat ops, but it's forward deployed. They need someone who knows logistics and field work. Hale gave them your name." Ava went quiet. "I thought I was grounded." "Grounded doesn't mean finished." She closed her eyes. The desert wasn't done with her, it seemed, or maybe she wasn't done with it. "When do they leave?" 2 weeks. "I'll think about it." "You always do," Reed said. Then softer, "Just make sure you're running toward something this time, not away." The line clicked dead. Ava stared at the dark screen, her reflection faint in the glass, tired eyes, fatting scars, the ghost of someone still standing. Maybe running wasn't the problem. Maybe stopping was. She looked back at the flag, rippling against the night. Somewhere in the distance, recruits were laughing, the sound of new beginnings. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like a ghost watching someone else's story. She felt like she might still have one left to tell. The next morning, she turned in her evaluation reports, signed her release papers, and walked to the edge of the base where the ocean met the fog. Waves crashed against the rocks, rhythmic and endless. She stood there for a long time, eyes closed, breathing in salt instead of sand. Peace didn't feel like she imagined. It wasn't silence. It wasn't rest. It was simply the space between wars, a pause before deciding who you were when no one was giving you orders. Ava opened her eyes. The horizon stretched wide and bright. And somewhere beyond it waited another mission, not of duty, but of purpose. Because sometimes redemption doesn't come from saving others. Sometimes it begins the moment you decide to save yourself. Why did coming back feel harder than leaving? The flight into the war zone was supposed to be routine humanitarian deployment, no combat ops. But the hum of the transport plane, the smell of oil and metal, the weight of armor pressed against her ribs, all of it felt like déjà vu. Sergeant Ava Cole sat near the rear, strapped into a jump seat, eyes closed. It had been almost 3 months since she left Afghanistan. 3 months of pretending she could live with peace. But peace didn't stick. It never did. She opened her eyes when the loadmaster shouted over the noise, 10 minutes to drop zone. Ava nodded, tugging her gloves tighter. Across from her sat Dr. Lin, the same medic from the schoolhouse extraction. His presence was the only familiar thing on this new mission. His calm grounded her. "Back again," he said over the engine roar. She smiled faintly. "Thought you retired." "I did twice, didn't take." "Same." He chuckled softly, eyes kind. "So what pulled you back this time?" Ava looked at the floor, didn't feel finished. Lin nodded knowingly. "No one ever does." The mission brief had sounded simple enough. A massive earthquake had struck a border province, towns flattened, infrastructure gone. The relief unit's task was to establish a forward aid station, coordinate supply drops, and stabilize survivors until larger convoys arrived. No gunfire, no insurgents, no politics, just rescue. But the closer they got, the more Ava doubted the word just. From the aircraft window, the land below looked scarred. Roads split open like veins, villages turned to dust. Smoke spiraled from what used to be homes. The devastation didn't need an enemy to look like war. The plane touched down on a cracked airstrip, engines howling against the wind. As the ramp lowered, heat and dust slammed into them. The air smelled of burning plastic and earth. The ground crew waved them forward. Trucks waited with Red Cross markings, already half-loaded with crates of medical supplies. Ava jumped down, scanning the horizon, ruined buildings, distant cries, the faint shimmer of heat on the asphalt. "Cole," a voice called. She turned to see Major Barrett, field commander for the relief team, mid-50s, tall, lean, his expression a mix of authority and exhaustion. He extended a hand. "Glad you made it. We could use your experience." She shook his hand firmly. "Where do you need me?" "Sector 12. It's bad. Locals say there's a school still standing, but it's full of trapped civilians. Structural collapse risks high." Her chest tightened at the word school. Different country, same ghosts. "I'll take a team." "You've got 4 hours before the next tremor window," Barrett warned. "After that, we pull everyone out, no exceptions." Ava nodded, understood. She gathered a team, 2 medics, 1 engineer and Lynn. They loaded into a truck, the tires crunching over broken glass and debris as they rolled toward the city's edge. The closer they got, the worse it looked. Entire streets were gone, reduced to rubble and twisted metal. Children wandered barefoot through dust clouds, eyes blank, searching for someone who wasn't coming back. The smell of smoke mixed with rot. The silence between the cries was worse. Lynn whispered, "It's like the world stopped breathing." Ava nodded, "Then we make it start again." They found the school by following the sound, faint tapping beneath concrete, rhythmic, desperate. "Over here," the engineer shouted. Ava knelt beside the collapsed structure, pressing her ear to the debris. Tap, pause, tap tap. Someone was still alive. 3 meters down left side, she said. "Let's move." The team worked fast, clearing debris by hand and crowbar. Every time a slab shifted, dust filled the air like smoke. The sun baked down, relentless. Sweat stung her eyes, but she didn't stop. After an hour, they broke through a narrow gap. Lynn slid a flashlight inside. "I see movement." Ava leaned in. "Hang on, we're coming." A voice answered, hoarse, trembling, a woman. "Please, children trapped further in." Ava's stomach twisted. "How many?" "5, maybe 6. The beam of light caught the woman's face, dirt-streaked, eyes wide with fear but alive. "Can you move?" Ava asked. She shook her head weakly. "My leg." Lynn squeezed her hand. "Stay with me. You're going home today." Ava turned to the engineer. "We need stabilization beams. The structure's shifting." He nodded. "We don't have time for full support. 2 more tremors, maybe less." Ava's radio crackled. Barrett's voice. "Cole, tremor window closing in 40 minutes. You need to pull back." "Negative," Ava replied. "We've got survivors, not leaving them." "Cole." 40 minutes, she said, cutting the line. Lynn shot her a look but didn't argue. They both knew she'd never walk away. They got the woman out first, unconscious but breathing. Then came the hard part. The tunnel leading deeper inside was barely wide enough to crawl through. The air smelled of dust and fear. Ava looked at Lynn. "Stay with her, I'll go." He grabbed her wrist. "You can't fit all the way through." "I'll make it." She tied a rescue line to her belt, grabbed a flashlight and squeezed into the gap. The concrete pressed against her shoulders and spine, the air thick and heavy. Each inch forward felt like pushing through the earth itself. "Call out if you hear me," she said. Silence, then a faint child's voice. "Here." She crawled faster. The flashlight beam caught shapes, small hands, a boy clutching another child's arm. Dust covered their faces, eyes wide. "It's okay," she said softly. "You're safe now." The boy shook his head. "My sister, she's under there." Ava shifted the light. A pile of collapsed ceiling beams pinned a small body beneath. The girl's chest moved barely. Ava's throat tightened. "Hold on, sweetheart, I've got you." She dug with her bare hands, pulling away chunks of plaster and wood. Her nails split, palms bleeding, but she didn't care. The concrete groaned overhead, a deep, sickening sound. The world rumbled. Cole, Lynn's voice echoed faintly, tremor starting. "Not yet," she shouted, yanking harder. The beam shifted, dust pouring down. She pulled the girl free, wrapped her in her vest, and backed out as fast as she could. The ground shook again, violent this time. The tunnel walls cracked, raining debris. She crawled, dragging both kids, lungs burning. The exit collapsed behind her just as she cleared the opening. The blast of air threw her forward into Lynn's arms. They landed hard, coughing. "Everyone out," Ava shouted, "now." The team scrambled for cover as the rest of the building came down in a roar of dust and thunder. The sound rolled through the valley, then faded into silence. When it was over, she looked around. The kids were alive. The woman, too. Lynn was bleeding from a cut on his forehead, but smiling. She dropped to her knees, hands trembling. "We did it." He nodded. "You did it." "No," she said softly, "we did." Hours later at the field hospital, the children slept in cots lined with blankets. The youngest, the girl she'd carried, reached out in her sleep, her hand brushing Ava's arm. For the first time in years, Ava didn't flinch from touch. Lynn sat beside her, sipping lukewarm coffee. "You broke at least 3 regulations today. 3's a new record." He smiled faintly. "You know, you could have died in there." "Wouldn't be the first time I got close." He studied her for a long moment. "You keep walking into the fire like you're trying to prove something." She looked away. "Maybe I am." "What?" "That it didn't break me." Lynn nodded slowly. "It didn't, but if you keep chasing that proof, it will." The words hit harder than she expected. She didn't respond. She couldn't. He stood, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Rest, you've earned it." As he walked away, Ava looked around the tent, the rows of sleeping survivors, the soft hum of machines, the muffled cries outside where others still searched. She felt the old ache rise again, that mix of relief and guilt, of saving some but not all. The same ache she'd carried since the explosion. She whispered to no one, "How many times do you have to walk through fire before you stop burning?" No answer came, just the wind outside, steady, endless. She lay back against the cot, staring at the tent ceiling until her vision blurred. And somewhere in the haze between exhaustion and sleep, she saw faces, the captain saluting her, the children laughing, the civilians she couldn't save, all fatting into one memory, a single image of hands reaching through smoke. She reached back, but the image dissolved. Maybe that was the point. Some things weren't meant to hold, only to remind you why you keep reaching. Because sometimes, saving others isn't about courage. It's about refusing to forget that you can. Why did quiet always come before disaster? The camp had been still for hours. The sky hung low and colorless, the air heavy with that strange hush the earth takes when it's deciding whether to move again. Ava Cole sat outside the medical tent, boots half buried in dust, staring at nothing. The rescued children slept inside, their faint breathing the only rhythm that made sense anymore. Lynn walked up beside her, holding 2 tin mugs of coffee that tasted more like smoke than beans. "You look like you're waiting for something." She didn't answer right away. You ever notice how calm it gets right before the ground shifts? He handed her the mug, nature's way of holding its breath. She managed a tired smile, "Then it's holding too long." He was about to reply when the first rumble hit, soft, distant like a giant dragging its hand across the horizon. Then another, stronger. The air thickened. Ava's eyes snapped to the ridgeline. The tents trembled. Aftershock, everyone out, move. The world convulsed. The ground split, throwing them sideways. Canvas ripped. Crates toppled. The sky filled with dust and screams. Ava grabbed Lin's arm, pulling him toward the open field as the medical tent collapsed behind them in a roar of tearing fabric. "Kids," she shouted, running back before he could stop her. The noise drowned his protest. She dove through the wreckage, hands clawing at debris, heart pounding. "I've got you, come on." Two small figures stumbled out of the dust. She grabbed them, shielding them as another tremor buckled the earth. The ground beneath her cracked, then dropped. The world went black. When she woke, there was no light, no wind, just the weight of silence and the ache of being alive. Her head throbbed. The air tasted like dirt and blood. Somewhere nearby, a faint groan. "Lynn," she croaked. A cough answered, "Still here." She felt relief flood through her chest. "Status." "Trapped ceiling came down. I can move one leg, you." She tried to shift, pain shot through her shoulder. "I've had better mornings." A weak voice interrupted, "Miss, I'm scared." The children, two of them, somewhere close. Ava swallowed hard. "It's okay, we're gonna get out." "Can't see," the smaller one whimpered. She reached out until her fingers brushed a trembling hand. "Then, hold on to me." She turned toward Lynn's voice. "Any light?" "Negative, comms are dead too." Debris crushed the radio. Ava exhaled slowly, forcing her mind to steady. "We dig toward sound, not sight. You still carry that multi-tool." He rustled fabric. "Yeah, half buried, but it'll do." "Good, start with small shifts. We collapse this pocket, we're done." They worked in silence broken only by the grind of rubble. Minutes felt like hours. Dust filled their lungs. Sweat stung their eyes. "Keep talking," she told the kids. "I need to hear your voices." The boy whispered, "My name, Omar." "Okay, Omar, you keep telling me things, anything." "I have a dog, his name's Shadow." Ava smiled in the dark. "That's a good name." He hesitated. "He was at home when the shaking came." Her throat tightened. "Then we'll find him when we get out." "If we get out." The thought came uninvited. She buried it. Hours blurred. They made slow progress, inches of light where none existed. Her muscles screamed, her hands shredded raw. Lynn's breathing grew labored. "You good?" she asked. "Ribs cracked maybe, still functional." "You sure?" "Not really." They both laughed weakly, the kind of laugh that kept panic from blooming. When the next tremor hit, it wasn't strong but cruel enough to shift the debris, closing their crawl space by half. The air grew thinner. Lynn cursed softly. "We're running out of oxygen." Ava pressed her forehead against the dirt, mind racing. Options were thin as air itself. "Cole," Lynn said quietly, "if it comes to it, you save them first." "Don't start." "I mean it." "I said don't." Her voice cracked. "You think I dragged you out of a collapsed school just to leave you in one?" He smiled faintly through the dark. "Fair point." She reached toward him, her hand finding his shoulder. "We all walk out, that's the rule." Something in the silence told her. He believed her even if he didn't. Sometime later, she didn't know if it was minutes or hours, a sound cut through the darkness. A low, rhythmic thud, then voices. "Rescue team, anybody hear us?" Ava almost didn't believe it. "Here, we're here." The thud stopped. A muffled answer, "Hold on, we've got a heat signature, we're coming through." Relief flooded her like oxygen. Lynn let out a shaky laugh. "Guess you're right again." But the rescue was slow. Every inch of progress sent more dust raining from above. The kids clung to her arms, trembling. She whispered small stories just to keep them calm, about ocean waves, about rain that smelled like life, about dogs named Shadow who always find their way home. Then came the final crunch of shifting debris, light speared through the gap, blinding and beautiful. Hands reached in. "We've got them." Ava pushed the children forward first, then Lynn. When they pulled her last, the sun hit her face like fire. For a long moment she couldn't move. Just lay there, breathing open air again, staring at the sky that no longer felt real. Barrett's voice broke through. Jesus, Cole, you never quit, do you? She tried to smile. Bad habit. They loaded Lynn onto a stretcher. His hand caught hers. Told you we'd walk out. You cheated, she said, voice breaking. You got carried. He laughed weakly, then passed out. That evening the camp was a ruin but alive. Survivors gathered near fires. Medics moved like ghosts through smoke. Ava sat on a crate, her arm in a sling, face streaked with grime. She watched the children reunited with families, the sound of joy cutting through the heaviness. Hale arrived by helicopter just before dusk. She climbed out, boots sinking into dust, expression unreadable. Heard you couldn't follow the no heroics rule again. Ava managed a crooked grin, working on it. Hale studied her a long moment. You lost 10 kilos, 3 fingernails, and most of your blood pressure, and you still found survivors. Lucky day. Luck has nothing to do with you. Ava looked toward the horizon, smoke curling against the setting sun. Maybe it does. Maybe luck's just what's left when will runs out. Hale crossed her arms. You ever wonder why people keep following you? Because they don't know better. Because you remind them not all orders make sense, she softened. You should write that down before you forget it. Ava laughed once. If I start writing, I'll never stop. Good, Hale said. Maybe that's what healing looks like. Night settled heavy. The rescue crews worked under floodlights, shadows moving through dust like ghosts rebuilding the living. Ava wandered past them until the noise faded behind her. She stopped at the edge of the collapsed school, a heap of concrete and memory. The moon hung above it, pale and silent. She knelt, placing a small piece of twisted metal on the rubble, a tag she'd found earlier, belonging to one of the local teachers who hadn't made it. Her whisper was almost lost to the wind. We found your kids, they're safe. The breeze carried her words away, as if delivering them somewhere they belonged. She stood there for a long time, watching the wind erase her footprints. Because that's what survival did, it erased, bit by bit, until all that remained were the stories you chose to keep. And she was still choosing. Later, back at the medic tent, Lynn woke briefly. She sat beside him. He smiled weakly. Still here. Where else would I be? Anywhere you wanted. She shook her head. You think I know how to live anywhere else? He chuckled softly, closing his eyes. Then maybe start learning. She looked at him for a long time, the flickering light playing across his face. One day, she said. Before dawn, Ava walked out again. The world was quiet, not the deadly kind of silence, but the fragile peace that follows chaos. The sky bled from black to silver. Birds, small, defiant things, circled above the ruins. She realized she hadn't heard birds since the blast all those months ago. She smiled, slow and tired. Maybe the world hadn't given up yet. Maybe neither had she. The radio crackled faintly from her belt, Hale's voice, dry but warm. Cole, when the ground stops shaking, command wants you in brief. They're talking about commendations. Ava pressed the mic. Tell them I'd rather they send more med kits. Hale laughed quietly. Copy that, you never change. Trying not to. She clipped the radio back, watching the sun break fully over the horizon. Its light spilled across the shattered valley, turning the dust to gold. The scene looked almost holy, not because it erased what happened, but because it existed after. She whispered to herself, voice barely audible under the wind, still standing. For the first time, the words didn't sound like defiance. They sounded like peace. Why did coming home feel harder than surviving the war? The tarmac shimmered under the afternoon sun. The engines of the transport plane wound down slowly, like a heartbeat learning to rest. Sergeant Ava Cole stepped onto American soil for the first time in almost a year. Her boots touched the concrete, and for a moment she just stood there, still, unsure, the noise of the airport pressing in from all sides. Around her, other soldiers disembarked, laughing, stretching, calling families. Ava carried no bags, just a duffel slung over one shoulder and a silence that had followed her across every border. A volunteer at the gate smiled and said, "Welcome home." The words hit harder than she expected. Home. It didn't sound like a place anymore. It sounded like something she'd been trying to remember. Weeks later, she found herself in a small apartment on the outskirts of San Diego. The walls were white, too white, the kind of sterile calm that made her restless. She hadn't slept through a night since the aftershock. The VA counselor called it residual hypervigilance. Ava called it not trusting silence. She tried to fill the hours running at dawn, visiting the base gym, volunteering at the recovery center. But the quiet always crept back in, that low hum under her ribs that whispered, "You left people behind." Sometimes she dreamed of the desert, the way it glowed before the sun went down, the way dust hung like memory in the air. She'd wake up halfway out of bed, reaching for a rifle that wasn't there. The mornings were the worst. The world felt too clean, too safe. Until one morning, she got a letter. The envelope was plain, military postmark, no return address. Inside was a short note written in a careful hand. "The children from Sector 12 are rebuilding the school. They still talk about you. The girl you carried is learning to walk again. Thought you'd want to know." There was no signature, but she knew the handwriting, Lynn. She read it 3 times before she let herself breathe. Then she folded it carefully and tucked it into her jacket pocket, right over her heart. Days blurred into weeks. Life moved around her like a film she wasn't part of. People talked about the war like it was over, like it was something you could leave behind with your uniform. One evening, she drove to the ocean, parked near the cliffs and just sat there as waves hammered the rocks below. The air was cold and sharp with salt. For the first time in months, she took off her dog tags, held them in her hand, feeling the cool metal against her palm. Each engraving told a story, her name, her number, her blood type, but none of them said who she'd become. A man approached from the path, older, gray at the temples, wearing a faded marine jacket. He nodded politely. "You serving or served?" "Served." He looked out at the sea. "You look like you still are." She smiled faintly. "Sometimes it feels that way." He chuckled. "It never really leaves, just changes uniform." He walked on, leaving her with the sound of the waves. She turned the tags over again. Then, without ceremony, she set them on the rock beside her and whispered, "You did your job." She didn't throw them away. She didn't need to. Letting them rest there was enough. That night, sleep came easily for the first time. Not dreamless, but softer. In the dream, she was back in the desert. The light was gold, the air still. She heard the laughter of children, the hum of helicopters, the rustle of wind through canvas. And beneath it all, a voice, calm, familiar. "Still standing, Cole." She turned. Captain Reed was there, smiling, alive as the day she'd seen him salute in the sand. "Always," she said. He nodded. "Then keep doing that, standing. The rest will figure itself out." When she woke, she didn't cry this time. She just sat in the quiet and let the morning light touch her face. A week later, she visited a VA outreach program that helped refugees and veterans integrate into civilian life. Lynn was there, thinner, walking with a cane, but alive. He grinned when he saw her, "Knew you wouldn't stay away long." "Guess you were right." They walked together down the hallway, walls lined with photos of field missions, faded and sun-bleached. One photo stopped her cold. It showed her mid-rescue, carrying the little girl from the collapsed school. Dust everywhere, eyes sharp, jaw set. She didn't remember anyone taking it. Someone had written underneath in marker, "Sometimes courage wears dust instead of medals." Ava stared at it for a long time. Lynn said quietly, "You should know they printed that photo in the relief journal. The caption didn't have your name, but everyone knew who it was." She smiled faintly. Good, let them remember the work, not the worker. He nodded. You still believe that? I have to. She traced a finger along the edge of the photo. Because if you start doing it for the recognition, you forget why you started. Lynn studied her face. So what now? Ava exhaled slowly. There's a shipment going back next month. Civilian mission this time. Schools, infrastructure, med training. They asked if I'd lead it. He raised an eyebrow, and I said yes. Lynn smiled. Of course you did. 2 months later, Ava stood once again in the desert. Different region, same light. She watched as crates of medical gear were unloaded from a transport truck, local workers laughing, children chasing the dust trails. The world was rebuilding, and somehow so was she. At midday, one of the aid coordinators handed her a small package. This came for you, from Sector 12. Inside was a hand-drawn card, shaky lines, bright colors. 6 children's signatures scrawled across the bottom. At the center, a picture of a woman in a uniform, kneeling beside 2 kids, sunlight behind her. The caption written in a child's handwriting read, "She came back, we knew she would." Ava pressed the paper to her chest, eyes burning. She didn't cry. She just stood there, breathing the same air she'd once thought she'd never return to. And for the first time in her life, coming back didn't feel like returning to pain. It felt like finishing a promise. That night she walked out to the ridge where the sky met the horizon she'd once crawled across, carrying a man through fire. The wind was warm. The stars were clear. The sound of life hummed softly below, laughter, voices, the clatter of tools rebuilding something broken. She thought about Reed, about Hale, about Lynn, about every name written on memorials she'd passed but never forgotten. She thought about the word hero, how it never fit right. She thought about the silence after the salute, about how it still echoed when she closed her eyes. And she realized maybe the point was never to escape the echoes. Maybe it was to carry them quietly, like a compass that never pointed north, only back to what mattered. She looked up at the stars and whispered the words that had carried her through every fire, every silence, every loss. Still standing. Then softer. Still trying. The wind moved across the sand, carrying her voice somewhere unseen. In the morning, a convoy rolled out toward the mountains, aid trucks filled with supplies, engines rumbling like distant thunder. Ava walked alongside them, one hand brushing the metal as they passed. No medals, no applause, just the steady rhythm of work that needed doing. She looked over the valley one last time, the sunlight catching the broken edges of buildings, turning them to gold. And she smiled, because she finally understood what Captain Reed meant when he said courage wasn't about never breaking. It was about breaking and coming back anyway. About knowing the cost and still choosing to try. About saving others long after anyone stops watching. She turned toward the road, shoulders squared, boots sinking into dust, the horizon stretching open before her. And as the first truck rolled forward, her voice carried through the rising heat, soft, steady, certain. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. And